The first video game was made in August of 1950 by a Dr. Joseph Cates. It was called Bertie the Brain. The game's contents were very simple, as was just tic-tac-toe. Bertie was created to be displayed at the Canadian National Exhibition, or the CNE for short. The CNE is a fair/event held in Toronto, where people from all over Canada can showcase and display their inventions. Bertie was one of the many inventions showcased at the CNE. Bertie was also considered one of the first video games. If that's the case, Bertie would be followed by many, many more different and unique video games. You could even consider Bertie to be the first of many unique and different works of art. Quick disclaimer before I make anyone mad and before I get into the rest of the video, art is subjective. This means what I consider art may not be considered art by you. Like I just said, art is subjective. For example, I consider art pieces from the Renaissance era art, like the Mona Lisa, the Creation of Adam, and the Statue of David. What I do not consider art is some pieces of modern art, like those paintings that are just blotches and splotches of paint and color. And on a bit of an unrelated note, my favorite piece of art is Wander Above a Sea of Fog. Back to video games. There are multiple things I would have to look at for a game to be a work of art. The first of those is the story. The main story, side stories, elements of world building and lore. Second would be the graphics of the game. This would be the art style of the game, and just to note, just because a game is extremely realistic doesn't mean I would consider it a work of art. It has to fit the mood and themes of the game. Third would have to be gameplay. Similar to graphics, gameplay would be considered art by me if it reflects the mood of the game and the themes of the game well. And then lastly, this is a bit of a no-brainer, music. Music, I think, could be considered art in most cases. And, well, with this, it would be whether or not the music meshes well with the graphic story and gameplay. I think a game that would be considered art by a large number of people would have to be Elden Ring. It fits the previously mentioned considerations. The story given outright to the player is very simple, but works incredibly well with the setting. A war-torn kingdom whose royal family is coming to an end, and your actions during the game decide whether you save said family, tear it down, and take over, and what you do when you do if you were to end the royal bloodline. More elements of the story are hidden, either in plain sight, like in the sort of safe world of the Round Table, or in secret places such as caves and dungeons. These elements add much, much more to the story that would be not given right out to the player. I would take a deeper dive into the story, but that would require a whole other video just for that. As for the world building of the game, it was all done phenomenally. For example, there are multiple out-of-place stone structures in the first bit of the game, which later in the game you find out belong to a floating palace which goes by the name of the Crumbling Farum Azula. The Farum Azula, before it was crumbling, was partially destroyed when a meteor hit the place. That meteor also made contact with the mainland and created another important point of interest in the game. This goes to show just how much effort the creators of the game put into just these two locations, as they established that they were both created essentially by the same meteor. And this isn't even one of the most important or impressive world-building pieces of the game. A great example of a game's graphics being art is The Legend of Zelda: Breath of the Wild. You may look at the game and think that it looks pretty cartoonish, but it looks cartoonish in a way that makes it look straight out of a comic book. Breath of the Wild is set in a medieval sort of world named Hyrule. Hyrule contains boundless amounts of monsters, magic, castles, and just anything you would normally find in any fictional medieval setting. When exploring the lands of Hyrule in the game, I get a slight sense of realism. Like all of these hills, mountains, plains, rocks, and lakes can be found in our own world today, or at least could somehow naturally form in the future. But all of a sudden, I come across an enemy camp filled with tons of little red goblins wearing nothing but loincloths. I might even come across a lion-horse hybrid that shoots fire and jumps like 40 feet in the air. But you also can't forget how every person in the game has pointy ears and abnormally big eyes. The sense of realism from the environment and the sense of fantasy when looking at the enemies and NPCs in the game just shows to me, and it just shows me that this game and its art style is just a work of art. For gameplay, I'll be coming back to Elden Ring. The gameplay is simple at first, you attack or dodge, and it's still the same process later in the game, but enemies have much quicker attacks and are in general just more tanky. The later bosses of the game are great examples of this. They all have hard, fast-hitting attacks and are able to take a whole lot of damage as well. You may be asking yourself, what does this little explanation have to do with anything? And to that I say, it has everything to do with why the gameplay of Elden Ring is a piece of art. The gameplay shows that the player is only human, and that the foes the player is coming up against are on the level or nearing the level of gods, having powers and abilities that allow them to do essentially whatever they want. It shows the tremendous leaps in power and difficulty for enemies and bosses, yet, despite all the odds being stacked against you, you prevail. You succeed, and you defeat your enemies in order to reach your final goal. Back again with Breath of the Wild, but this time for the music in the game. The music in this game is just amazing. There's music for just about every little thing in the game. And in case you haven't noticed, the music playing in the background of this video has been from Breath of the Wild. You have music for the multiple villages in the game. Music for exploring the lands of Hyrule. Music for fighting enemies and bosses. And you even have music for just riding your horse. What I'm saying here is that Breath of the Wild has nearly everything when it comes to music. The music just fits in so incredibly well with the world, the gameplay, and the art style. Sometimes when I'm just running around listening to music, or maybe I'm riding my horse and just following the many paths in the game, I come across a random bokoblin camp and, just hear the sudden change from the calming music of exploring the world to the slightly intense music of fighting these pretty weak enemies. It just fits in and meshes so well together. You can just feel as if you're in the game and you're having these calm thoughts going from peacefulness to intensity as you fight your enemies. And some of my favorite moments of the game are when you're fighting any of the bosses and then the music itself just helps amp up the intensity of the moment and just make it feel much more serious than it might be. Now that I've gone over these examples on how games can be art, I hope that you too can take a look at your own favorite games and look at them as pieces of art. And just remember, if you don't agree with anything I have said in this video, it's all my own opinion and I don't care about yours. With all that being said, have a good night or day or morning, and see you next time.